Resonance Awakening, The Secrets of the Titan Guardians and the Lost Balance. Chapter 1, A Whisper from the Deep. Beneath the endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean, something ancient stirred. The waters were deceptively calm, with only the occasional ripple betraying the vast energy locked beneath. Far below, deep in a trench known to only a handful of marine biologists, a seismic event had triggered a subtle but insistent vibration. This was no ordinary tremor. It was a pulse that reverberated to the rock, traveling along ancient fault lines and rousing a creature that had slumbered for centuries. The first to notice were not scientists, but fishermen. In the early hours of the morning, just before dawn, an experienced crew aboard the Narukami Maru hauled in their nets only to find them shredded. Their sonar equipment, reliable for years, showed sudden interference. Then the waters began to churn. Captain Harada squinted into the horizon. "Something's wrong," he muttered. His first mate, Akio, leaned over the rail, trying to make sense of the strange, glowing patches that appeared beneath the surface. The sea seemed to rise and fall unnaturally, as if breathing. Without warning, a geyser of water erupted in the distance, followed by a low, guttural rumble. "This is no ordinary earthquake," Harada said. "Get on the radio. We need to warn the coast." But before they could send a proper distress signal, the noise came again, louder, closer. Something enormous broke the surface far from the ship, its silhouette barely visible in the faint pre-dawn light. It was only for a moment, but it was enough for every man aboard to feel the weight of its presence. They had seen monsters and legends in old films, but this was real, and it was awake. Chapter 2, The First Sight. The Narukami Maru drifted, eerily still. For the first time in Harada's career, he could hear the strained creak of the ship's hull against the silence. Every crew member stood frozen at their posts. No one spoke. No one moved. The shadow that had breached the surface, massive, impossibly massive, had vanished beneath the waves as quickly as it appeared, but the tension it left behind was suffocating. It's gone," Akio whispered, though no one answered. Captain Harada kept his binoculars fixed on the horizon, scanning the faint pre-dawn light. The ocean looked calm again, as if nothing had happened. The strange glowing beneath the waves had stopped. The rumbling had ceased. He lowered the binoculars and turned to Akio. "Gone or not, that thing was no whale. We need to report this. Now!" Akio nodded, his face pale. He made his way to the radio, but before he could reach it, another sound stopped him in his tracks. It was a hum, low, resonant, and deep. It rolled across the water, vibrating through the ship's steel frame. The crew looked around in alarm. "Is it coming back?" someone asked. Harada's jaw tightened. "Stay at your stations. Keep your eyes open." Then the hum changed. It became a growl, a sound that seemed almost alive, and the water began to rise again like before. But this time, it wasn't a distant plume. It was close. Too close. "Brace yourselves." Harada barked. A wave, nearly 20 feet tall, rolled toward them. The Narukami Maru pitched hard, sending crates and equipment sliding across the deck. The crew held onto railings and rigging, their cries drowned out by the roar of the sea. And as the wave passed, the ship steadied just enough for them to look out at what had caused it. It rose from the water slowly. First came the head, sharply ridged, crowned with what looked like jagged plates of bone or horn. The eyes glowed faintly, yellow-orange and unsettling. Its snout parted, revealing rows of teeth large enough to snap a lifeboat in half. Then the shoulders emerged, vast and armored, shedding water like a breaching submarine. The creature kept rising, and with every inch, the sheer scale of it became clearer. No one had imagined anything so immense, so otherworldly. One of the crew stumbled backward, falling onto the deck. It's real. It's real." Akio stood frozen, his hand on the radio's receiver, unable to speak. Harada grabbed the microphone from him and shouted into it. "This is the Narukami Maru. Mayday! Mayday! We've encountered," he hesitated. What could he call it? A creature. A massive sea creature, heading northeast. "We're near latitude 30 north, longitude 140 east. Anyone respond." Static crackled back at them. No reply. The monster tilted its head. as if observing them. Then it roared. It wasn't the deep rumble from earlier. This was a true roar, high-pitched and deafening, an unearthly sound that shook the air and the crew's bones alike. It felt more like an earthquake than a cry, reverberating in their skulls. "Captain, what do we do?" Akio asked, his voice barely audible over the roar. Harada clenched his fists. "Keep reporting. Someone's got to hear us. And pray it doesn't come closer." But it didn't seem interested in the ship. After its roar, it turned, moving with shocking grace for something its size. Its tail emerged briefly, long, armored, and tipped with spike ridges, before slipping beneath the waves. The monster began to head northeast, just as Harada had described in his call. Within minutes, it was gone again, leaving only the trembling crew and a battered, silent ship. Harada set the radio down and slumped against the railing. "I don't know what that was," he said quietly, "but the world's about to find out." Far to the northeast, as the first rays of sunlight broke the horizon, a small coastal town began to stir. Fishermen were preparing their boats. Market vendors set up their stalls. Families opened their windows to let in the morning breeze. Life moved forward as usual, blissfully unaware that something monstrous was headed their way. To be continued. Chapter 3. The Coastal Awakening. The first beams of dawn painted the fishing town of Minato a soft gold. It was a quiet place, tucked into a shallow cove where the waters usually ran calm. The streets were narrow, flanked by wooden buildings that had stood for generations. Families lived close to one another, and word of news, good or bad, spread quickly. At the harbor, older fishermen were already returning from their early trips. A few small boats swayed gently at the docks, their holds heavy with the morning's catch. Children ran barefoot along the pier, their laughter mingling with the cries of seagulls. At the central market, vendors set out crates of squid and tuna, while fishmongers shouted their prices. The smell of fresh seafood filled the air. Takashi Yamada, a retired sailor who now ran a bait shop, stood at his storefront, chewing on a piece of dried squid. He watched the activity around the docks with the same critical eye he developed during his decades at sea. To him, the water seemed a little off today. The usual clear turquoise had turned a darker shade, and there was an odd chill in the breeze that raised goosebumps on his arms. He muttered under his breath and turned to go back inside. "Something wrong, Takashi-san?" asked Keiko, one of the younger vendors. She was unloading a box of mackerel onto a wooden display table nearby. "Just my old bones complaining," Takashi replied. "The air feels different. That's all." Keiko smiled politely, though she didn't give it much thought. She was more concerned with selling her fish before the day's heat set in. Takashi lingered at his shop's entrance for a moment longer, peering out at the horizon. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something big. Across town, near the old temple grounds, a group of school children gathered around a radio. The local news station was reporting on a strange series of seismic events detected out at sea. The announcer's voice crackled as she read the details. Early this morning, a series of underwater tremors were recorded roughly 200 kilometers offshore. Scientists from the Japan Meteorological Agency are monitoring the situation closely. No tsunami warning has been issued, but residents are advised to remain vigilant. The kids listen with half interest, more intrigued by the novelty of a potential earthquake than concerned. After all, earthquakes were not uncommon in Japan. But one boy, Kenji, furrowed his brow. He had heard his grandfather's old stories about the sea, about things that lived deep below. He whispered to his friend, "Do you think it could be?" "Could be what?" his friend asked, laughing. "You've been watching too many monster movies." Kenji didn't laugh. Instead, he stared toward the coast, his imagination running wild. Meanwhile, at a small research station perched on the rocky cliffs overlooking the cove, Dr. Yuki Tanaka and her assistant Hiro examined the latest readings from their oceanographic equipment. The station's instruments had picked up the same disturbances mentioned in the news broadcast, but the patterns didn't align with any normal tectonic activity. The seismograph showed a pulsing rhythm, not the jagged spikes of an earthquake. Yuki rubbed her temples as she studied the data. "This doesn't make sense," she murmured. "If it's not tectonic, what's causing these readings? Could it be a submarine?" Some sort of deep-sea mining operation, Hiro suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. Yuki shook her head. No, it's too consistent, too powerful. She paused, her gaze drifting to the wide expanse of ocean visible through the station's windows. Whatever it is, it's moving. Moving toward us? She didn't answer right away. The idea sounded absurd, but the numbers didn't lie. She tapped a pencil against her desk and said, "Send the data to the university. I need another set of eyes on this." Hiro nodded and began typing at the nearby console. As he worked, the radio on the desk buzzed with static. A voice broke through, garbled, faint, but urgent. "This is an Arakami Maru, massive sea creature, heading northeast. Repeat, massive." The signal cut off, leaving only static. Yuki grabbed the radio. "This is Minato Research Station. Please repeat. You said a massive sea creature? What's your position?" No response came. Hiro stared at the radio, then at Yuki. "Did they say?" "They said massive sea creature," Yuki confirmed, her voice tight. She turned back to the window. "Get me a direct line to the Coast Guard. Now!" Hiro scrambled to comply. The once peaceful town of Minato was about to become the center of something far beyond its quiet, ordinary existence. In the distance, faint ripples began to form on the horizon, heading steadily toward the cove. To be continued. Chapter 4, A Tide of Shadows. By midday, the atmosphere of Minato had begun to shift. Word of the strange radio transmission spread quickly among the fishermen and shopkeepers, though most dismissed it as a misunderstanding or a prank. Yet a small, unshakable sense of unease lingered in the air. The wind picked up, carrying a briny tang that tasted sharper than usual. Seabirds flew erratically, their cries louder and more frantic, as if they too sensed something amiss. Keiko, at her market stall, noticed that fewer people were stopping to buy fish. "What's wrong with everyone today?" she muttered to herself, rearranging her crates to appear fuller. Her younger brother, Takashi, had just returned from helping on a fishing boat and stood nearby. Some of the older guys were talking about that radio call, saying it's a sign. Takashi said, scratching his head. "A sign of what?" Keiko asked, rolling her eyes. "You know, a kaiju or something," he replied with a slight grin, though his tone was uncertain. "Like in those old movies Granddad used to watch." Keiko snorted. "You're ridiculous. Probably just some drunk sailor, making stuff up." But even as she said it, she glanced uneasily toward the water. The horizon looked strange, hazy, almost distorted. A small boat coming into harbor rocked more than it should have in the calm waters. The fishermen on board were shouting, pointing back out to sea. Keiko couldn't make out their words, but their frantic gestures set her heart racing. Meanwhile, at the research station, Dr. Tanaka paced control room, surrounded by monitors displaying graphs, sonar readings, and seismic data. The call from an Arakami Maru had been logged but remained unconfirmed. Yuki had spent hours reviewing the patterns, looking for any rational explanation. So far, she had none. It's not tectonic. It's not weather-related. And it's not man-made, at least not as far as we can tell. Yuki said aloud, more to herself than to Hiro. Hiro, seated at a terminal, glanced up. "So what is it?" Yuki stopped pacing and looked out the window again. The sea, shimmering under the afternoon sun, seemed calm. Too calm. The rhythm of the anomaly suggested movement, purposeful, directed. Something was approaching. "I don't know," Yuki admitted, "but if it's what that ship's captain said, we might be looking at a living organism of unprecedented size." Hiro stared at her. "You think it's alive?" "It's a theory, one that we need more data to support," she said, turning back to her computer. "Have university researchers responded yet?" "They're still reviewing the files. It'll take time." Yuki clenched her fists. Time wasn't on their side. Whatever this was, it wasn't waiting. She felt in her gut, the same instinct that had guided her through countless field expeditions. Something was coming, something they weren't ready for. Down at the docks, Takashi stood into the pier, gazing out over the water. His hand rested on the hilt of a knife he'd carried since his youth. The man hadn't gone out to sea in years, yet his sailor's instincts hadn't faded. He watched the horizon, his expression grim. A sudden shift in the wind made him tense. The air seemed heavier, thicker. The water lapped at the pilings more urgently. Then he saw it. Something dark, moving just beneath the surface. A shadow, long and massive, passing silently by. "Takashi-san!" A younger fisherman called from the nearby boat. "What is it?" Takashi didn't answer. He simply backed away from the edge of the pier, his eyes never leaving the shadow. When it disappeared, he turned and strode toward the town center. "What did you see?" the fisherman asked again, running after him. Takashi stopped, his face pale. "We need to tell the others," he said. "Something's coming this way." As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting golden hues over the town, Minato's residents continued their daily routines. But those who had noticed the strange behavior of the sea, the odd patterns in the wind, and the ominous radio transmission couldn't shake a growing sense of dread. By nightfall, the coastal town would no longer be able to ignore the signs. The tide of shadows was rolling in. To be continued. Chapter 5. The Sound of Thunder. Night had fallen over Minato, casting the town in a blanket of stillness. The usual sound of the harbor, the gentle sloshing of waves, the occasional cry of a gull, were absent. Instead, a heavy silence gripped the coastline, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. Only the faint flicker of lanterns and streetlights revealed any signs of life. Fishermen who might normally stay out late were already home, doors locked, speaking in hushed tones. In the local bar, the usually boisterous crowd nursed their drinks quietly, eyes shifting toward the windows as though expecting something to burst in at any moment. Takashi sat alone at the bar, his weathered hands gripping a cup of warm sake. The bartender, an old friend, leaned closer and whispered, "Takashi, you're scaring people with all this talk. What did you really see?" "It wasn't just me," Takashi said, his voice steady. "Others saw the shadows, felt the change in the water. The air's different. We all know it. Sure, the sea's acting strange, but strange doesn't mean danger," the bartender replied, though the worry in his eyes betrayed him. Takashi took a slow sip and didn't answer. What could he say? That he'd seen the shadow of something bigger than any fishing vessel? That he'd felt the pulse of something alive beneath the waves? He wasn't sure if he believed it himself. But the unease was real, and it seeped into every corner of the town. Meanwhile, up at the research station, Dr. Yuki Tanaka was still glued to her monitors. The patterns on the seismic readings had changed again. They were rhythmic, like the beat of a drum or the footfalls of a giant marching across the ocean floor. Hiro had stepped outside for a break, leaving her alone in the dimly lit lab. She stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then it happened. A deep, resonant sound echoed through the night. It wasn't the roar from the Narukami Maru broadcast. This was something different, longer, lower, and louder. It was like thunder, but it didn't come from the sky. The very walls of the research station seemed to tremble with the force of it. Yuki froze, her hand gripping the edge of the desk. "Did you hear that?" Hiro called, rushing back inside. Yuki nodded slowly. "It wasn't an earthquake." "No," Hiro agreed, wide-eyed. "It was something else." The sound faded, leaving behind an eerie quiet. For a moment, Yuki thought she could hear her own heartbeat echoing in the silence. Then a low hum began to rise again, distant but unmistakable. It was coming closer. Back in the town, the thunderous noise had startled everyone. People stepped out of their homes, looking around in confusion. Keiko and Takeshi, who had stayed up late discussing the day's strange events, rushed to the front porch. The air felt heavier, thicker, as though it carried an electric charge. Takeshi's eyes darted toward the bay. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Keiko nodded, gripping his arm. It's coming from the water." Out on the pier, the few fishermen who had lingered turned on flashlights and pointed them toward the dark waves. The beams of light barely penetrated the surface, but they caught faint, fleeting glimpses of movement, large shapes gliding beneath the water, too vast to be fish, too steady to be random currents. A fisherman shouted, "There! Did you see that?" Another, trembling, nodded. It's like shadows under the waves. The sound grew louder. It was now more than just a low hum. It was a thrum, a vibration that rattled the wooden planks of the pier. The water near the docks began to swirl, rippling outward as if something enormous was stirring beneath. Then, the shadows that had been moving silently below suddenly stopped. For an agonizing moment, everything was still, and then it rose. The water erupted with violent force as a massive shape broke the surface. Illuminated by the faint glow of lanterns and flashlights, the creature revealed itself. Its skin, dark and ridged like ancient armor, glistened with seawater. Its eyes burned with a deep orange light, almost as if it cared to fire the earth's core within them. As it loomed over the town, its jagged spines stood tall, each one tipped with glinting edges that caught the light. The creature's roar, a bone-shaking cacophony, shattered the stillness of the night. Takashi stood at the bar's doorway, staring up at the monster. For a moment, the old sailor was transported back to his younger days, back to the stories his father had told him of creatures from the deep, the ones no one believed in, but everyone feared. This was no legend. This was real, and it was just beginning, to be continued. Chapter 6, Rising Fear. The sight of the creature towering over the harbor drove most of the onlookers into immediate panic. Fishermen who had gathered at the docks turned and sprinted toward their homes, their shouts of terror echoing through the narrow streets. Some dropped flashlights, others stumbled over loose planks, but no one dared look back. The bar emptied in seconds, chairs and glasses left scattered as patrons ran into the night. Takashi, however, did not move. He stood rooted in place, his old sailor's instincts warring with a paralyzing fear coursing through his veins. The monstrous thing before him, its glowing eyes fixed on the town, was no phantom conjured by stormy nights and drunken tales. It was real, it was alive, and it was enormous. The creature let out another roar, deeper this time, and the sound swept over the town like a wave of physical force. Windows rattled and cracked. Boats strained at their moorings, and the air itself seemed to vibrate. Lights flickered as if the power grid were struggling to maintain its grip on reality. Up at the research station, Yuki Tanaka gripped the edge of her desk. She and Hiro had rushed to the observation deck, where a pair of powerful binoculars brought the harbor into stark, terrifying clarity. "I can't believe it," Hiro whispered. "It's actually here." Yuki didn't respond. Her mind raced through everything she knew about marine biology, physics, and even folklore, trying to comprehend what she was seeing. The sheer scale of the creature was beyond anything she had ever studied. It moved with purpose, every motion of its colossal body causing the water around it to churn violently. There was no mistaking it now. This was the source of the seismic disturbances, the mysterious hum, and the pulse-like signals they'd been recording. "We need to alert the government," Yuki said finally. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "This isn't just a scientific discovery. This is an immediate threat." Hiro nodded, already reaching for the emergency communications line. Down below, Keiko and Takashi ran through the streets, following the flow of fleeing townsfolk. People shouted warnings to their neighbors, pounded on doors to rouse anyone still asleep, and grabbed whatever they could carry. Keiko held tightly onto her brother's hand, pulling him along as the crowd surged. "What is it?" Takashi yelled, struggling to keep up. "I don't know." Keiko shouted back, "Just keep running." She glanced over her shoulder for a split second and immediately wished she hadn't. The creature had turned slightly, its massive tail sweeping through the water with a motion that sent waves crashing against the docks. The wooden structure splintered like toothpicks, sending debris flying. Boats that hadn't been untied were ripped from their moorings and smashed together. The entire harbor seemed to collapse in on itself under the weight of the beast's presence. The streets of Minato, usually so quiet at this hour, became a maze of frantic activity. Families poured into the town square, shouting for loved ones and huddling together. The mayor, a stout man named Shigeki Morita, tried to climb onto a crate to address the panicked crowd. His voice was hoarse as he yelled for calm. "Everyone, please stay together. We'll evacuate in an orderly fashion. Just listen." A crash interrupted him. The creature had shifted closer, its massive head now visible above the rooftops. The orange glow of its eyes lit up the surrounding buildings, casting long, ominous shadows. When it roared again, the force was enough to knock Morita from his perch. People scattered, screaming. Somewhere in the chaos, Keiko and Takeshi were pushed into an alleyway. They crouched behind a stack of crates, breathing heavily. Takeshi's face was pale, his hands gripping the rough wooden edges, so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "What do we do, Keiko?" he whispered, tears brimming in his eyes. Keiko bit her lip, trying to keep her composure. "We stay out of its sight. Wait until it moves on." But even as she said it, she felt the ground beneath her tremble. The creature was moving again. This wasn't going to end quickly, and deep down, she knew it. At the research station, Yuki was on the phone with the regional authorities. "No, I'm not joking," she snapped, her professional demeanor cracking under the pressure. "There's a massive creature in Minato Harbor. It's already destroyed the docks. We need immediate evacuation and military support." She glanced at Hiro, who was monitoring the radar. "Anything new?" "The creature's movement is erratic," Hiro reported. "It's not heading directly inland, but it's not staying in one spot either. It's circling, almost like it's searching for something." Yuki frowned. "Searching for what?" "I don't know," Hiro admitted, "but it doesn't seem to be retreating." Yuki looked back toward the town. Fires were beginning to spread from the damaged buildings. She could see the distant glow of headlights as cars and trucks lined up to leave. But she also saw the people who hadn't yet made it out, the ones still hiding, still waiting, still trying to understand what was happening. This was only the beginning, she thought. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to stop here. Not until it found what it was looking for. To be continued. Chapter 7. The Monsters March. The evacuation was chaotic. Families crammed into small trucks, parents shouting for their children. People abandoning their homes without a second thought. The streets that had been quiet and sleepy only hours earlier were now a tangled web of fear and confusion. Minato's narrow lanes, once charming, were now a bottleneck. Every horn honk, every shouted order, only added to the panic. Mayor Shigeki Morita had lost his voice trying to maintain order. He stumbled down from his makeshift podium and made his way to the local police station, where a cluster of officers were trying to coordinate. He grabbed the arm of Inspector Ryusuke Saito, the highest-ranking officer in town. "What's the status on the North Road?" Morita asked, his voice hoarse. "Blocked," Saito replied tersely. "A downed tree, likely from that first quake. We've got 2 officers trying to clear it, but it's going to take time. Everyone's piling onto the southern route." Morita swore under his breath. "Then that's our priority. Get as many out as possible. And tell everyone who can walk ahead for the high ground. If that thing moves inland..." His words were cut off by another deafening roar. The sound made the windows rattle and the very ground beneath them tremble. Everyone froze for a moment, ears ringing, before breaking into an even more frenzied scramble. Some ran for their cars, while others dropped their belongings and fled on foot. In the center of town, Keiko and Takeshi emerged from the alley. The firelight reflected in their wide eyes as they took in the growing chaos around them. The creature's roar still echoed in their ears, and neither of them could quite bring themselves to speak. It was Takeshi who finally broke the silence. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice shaking. Keiko looked around, weighing their options. "We go uphill," she said, "toward the old temple." "The temple?" Takeshi's brow furrowed. "Why?" "Because it's out of the way," Keiko said, taking his hand. "And we'll have a better view from there. We'll be able to see where it's going. But what if it sees us?" Keiko didn't answer. She couldn't promise they'd be safe. She didn't even know if safety was possible. But standing in the middle of town, with buildings crumbling and people running in all directions, was no longer an option. She pulled Takeshi along, forcing her feet to move despite the fear that threatened to paralyze her. The old temple sat on a hill overlooking the town. It wasn't far, but the climb felt endless. They passed others on the road, families clutching children and whatever possessions they could carry. The crowd thinned as they neared the temple grounds, and by the time Keiko and Takeshi reached the top, the 2 of them were alone. From the temple's main courtyard, they could see the entirety of Minato laid out below them. The harbor was unrecognizable. The docks were gone, replaced by splintered wood and debris. Boats were scattered like toys in a bathtub. Fires burned in several spots, their orange glow reflecting off the water. And in the center of it all, the creature loomed. Its massive form was partially obscured by the smoke, but its glowing eyes were unmistakable. The creature had moved closer to shore, its spine back rising like a mountain above the waves. It seemed to pause for a moment, as if considering its next move. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it began to step onto land. The ground shook with every step. The monster's clawed feet crushed the remnants of the docks and dug into the earth as if it were wet sand. Each movement was both ponderous and unstoppable, like the inevitable advance of a storm. Takeshi gasped. It's coming onto land. Keiko's stomach sank. They had hoped, prayed, that it might stay in the water. But now it was clear the creature had no intention of retreating. It moved with purpose, heading directly toward the heart of Minato. What do we do? Takeshi asked again, his voice barely audible. Keiko clenched her fists, her mind racing. She thought about their family, their friends, the lives they had built in this quiet town. All of it was in danger now, and no one seemed to have any answers. We wait, she said finally. We wait and we watch. If we have to run, we'll run. But if it stops, if it turns back. She didn't finish her sentence. They both knew it was wishful thinking. Back at the research station, Yuki, Tanaka, and Hiro were desperately trying to contact anyone who could help. The initial response from the regional authorities had been skeptical, but after the broadcasted roars and the reports from fleeing townsfolk, their calls were finally being taken seriously. Yuki spoke into radio, her voice steady but urgent. Minato is being evacuated, but the process is slow. We need immediate assistance. The creature has made landfall. The line crackled. A voice came through, strained but resolute. We're dispatching units now. Be advised, the JSDF is also mobilizing. Keep us updated on its movements. Understood, Yuki replied. She set the radio down and turned to Hiro. Anything new on the radar? It's moving inland, Hiro said, his face pale. Steadily. It's not stopping. Yuki stared at the screen, then out the window. In the distance, the glow of fires and the faint silhouette of the creature filled her vision. Whatever was happening in Minato was only the beginning. The world wasn't ready for what was coming next. To be continued. Chapter 8. Into the Jungle of Steel. The creature had crossed into Minato, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Once bustling markets and tight-knit neighborhoods now lay in ruins. Cars were abandoned on narrow roads, overturned and crumpled like discarded toys. Telephone poles lay shattered, their cables sparking against the debris. The night had turned chaotic, filled with cacophony of distant screams, wailing sirens, and the occasional gut-wrenching roar from the beast. Yet the creature didn't stop. It marched on, its colossal body moving with a purpose that no one could understand. At the temple on the hill, Keiko and Takeshi watched helpless as the monster's path grew clearer. It wasn't rampaging aimlessly. It was heading inland, away from the harbor, straight through the heart of their once tranquil town. Keiko held her brother close, her mind racing. It wasn't just the sight of destruction. It was the sheer power of the creature. It seemed unstoppable, indifferent to anything in its way. Why isn't it stopping? Takeshi whispered, his voice trembling. Why is it doing this? I don't know, Keiko replied. Her voice was hollow. I don't think anyone knows. Down below, a lone figure moved through the debris-strewn streets. Takashi, his knife tucked into his belt, crept along the shadows of toppled walls and overturned market stalls. The veteran sailor had no delusions about his chances against something so massive, but he felt compelled to see it with his own eyes, to understand the thing that had come to his home. He thought of the stories his father had told him as a child, tales of sea gods and monstrous creatures from a time before mankind ruled the land. Could this be one of them? A relic of some forgotten age? As Takashi turned a corner, he caught a brief glimpse of the beast's massive tail swinging to the smoke-filled air. The tail struck a row of houses, sending fragments of wood and stone cascading like a landslide. Takashi froze, his breath caught in his throat. In that moment, he knew that no weapon he carried could make a difference. This was not something man was meant to fight. It was something to endure, to survive, if possible. At the research station, Yuki Tanaka and Hiro monitored the creature's progress, relaying updates to the regional authorities. The seismic readings had grown erratic, the deep pulses becoming less predictable. Yuki stared at the charts, her brow furrowed. "Something's changed," she said. "It's not just moving inland, it's accelerating." Hiro looked up from his console. What could be causing that? "I don't know," Yuki admitted, "but it's heading straight toward the industrial district. If it reaches the factories, it could set off an explosion," Hiro finished grimly. "Or worse." Yuki grabbed the radio again, her voice sharp. "This is Dr. Yuki Tanaka. The creature is nearing Minato's industrial area. The factories contain highly volatile materials. If it breaches one of the main storage facilities, we could see a catastrophic chain reaction." "Understood," came the reply. "We're redirecting evacuation routes and accelerating the deployment of defense units." Yuki put the radio down, but her hands continued to shake. She had spent her career studying marine life, dedicating herself to understanding the natural world. Now she was witnessing something entirely outside her expertise, something that defied all logic and explanation, and she was powerless to stop it. In the town below, Keiko and Takashi watched as the creature reached the edge of the industrial district. It loomed over the warehouses and smokestacks like a mountain come to life. The creature's glowing eyes seemed to scan the area, as if it were searching for something specific. Then it let out another roar, a sound that shook the earth and sent shock waves rippling to the remaining buildings. One by one, the structures began to collapse. A storage silo crumpled as the creature brushed past it. A row of delivery trucks exploded in a burst of flame, the heat radiating outward in waves. People who had been trying to escape on foot screamed as the ground split beneath them, the creature's weight cracking the asphalt like thin ice. Keiko gripped Takashi's hand. "We can't stay here. If it comes this way..." She didn't finish the thought. There was no need to. Both of them knew they had to keep moving, to stay ahead of the monster's relentless march. Keiko glanced toward the higher hills beyond the temple. If they could reach those hills, maybe, just maybe, they'd be safe. But she also knew the beast's path was unpredictable. Safety might be nothing more than an illusion. "We have to go," Keiko said firmly. "Now." Takashi hesitated only a moment before nodding. Together, they turned and began climbing toward the distant hills, their hearts pounding as the creature's roars echoed behind them. Below, the industrial district continued to crumble, the night sky illuminated by a growing inferno. For Minato, the worst was far from over. To be continued. Chapter 9, The Chaos Beyond. The industrial district burned. Fires erupted like volcanoes, sending plumes of smoke spiraling into the night sky. The glow of the inferno reflected off the monstrous creature's back, highlighting the serrated spines that jutted from its form. As it moved, each step brought new destruction. Its tail swung wide, demolishing another row of warehouses. Tanks of chemical solvents exploded in brilliant bursts of orange and blue flame, while smokestacks toppled like felled trees. Keiko and Takashi reached the tree line beyond the temple's grounds, their lungs burning from exertion. The high ground offered a temporary reprieve from the destruction below, but not a moment of peace. Every explosion, every reverberating roar reached them. They could see the creature clearly now, a moving mountain of raw power, its glowing eyes casting light into the swirling smoke. What is it even looking for? Takashi asked, his voice shaking. Keiko didn't answer. Her mind raced, grappling with questions she couldn't answer. Why was it here? Why now? The destruction seemed deliberate, yet without clear reason. What could possibly bring a creature of this scale into their small, quiet town? She remembered old stories her grandfather used to tell. Stories about ancient beasts that guarded the oceans, rising only when something had disturbed their domain. But those were just tales, myths passed down to explain unexplained disasters. Surely there was a scientific explanation for all this, wasn't there? Back at the research station, Yuki Tanaka and Hiro struggled to make sense of the incoming data. The seismic patterns had changed again, shifting into a more erratic rhythm. The pulses now seemed to come not from the creature itself, but from a point further inland. It's not just the creature causing these readings, Yuki said, her eyes narrowing at the monitors. Something is drawing it. Hiro looked up from his screen. What could that be? Another creature? Or something else entirely? Yuki replied. But whatever it is, it's pulling this thing toward it. It's not just moving randomly. It's following a signal. Yuki picked up the radio, dialing into the emergency frequency. This is Dr. Yuki Tanaka at the Minato Research Station. The creature appears to be heading toward a specific point inland. We don't know what it's targeting, but the pattern suggests it's following a signal. Is there any high-energy source, geological anomaly, or military installation in its path? The line was silent for a moment. Then a gruff voice replied, We're looking into it. Stand by. Stand by. Yuki repeated under her breath, frustration evident. We don't have time to stand by. She slammed the radio down and turned back to Hiro. Pull every map we have. I want to know what's in its direct path. Something's there, something it's heading for. Meanwhile, Takashi moved cautiously through the outskirts of the industrial district. The heat from the fires was unbearable, and the air was thick with smoke. He covered his mouth with a handkerchief, squinting through the haze. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but his gut told him he needed to keep going. The destruction around him was beyond anything he'd imagined. This wasn't just a monster rampaging out of instinct. This was a calculated march, as though the creature had a purpose. A distant crash made him freeze. He pressed himself against the remains of a concrete wall, peering out carefully. The creature was close now, its immense form partially obscured by smoke and flames. It seemed to hesitate for a moment, its glowing eyes scanning the area. Takashi felt a chill despite the searing heat. There was something intelligent in its movements, something deliberate. He heard a voice, faint, distant, but unmistakably human. Turning toward the sound, he spotted a small group of people huddled near a partially collapsed building. They were trapped, surrounded by debris, and unable to move. The creature's steps were bringing it dangerously close to their location. Takashi's grip tightened on his knife. He knew it was foolish. There was nothing he could do against something of this scale. But those people needed help, and he couldn't just leave them. Taking a deep breath, he moved toward them, using the debris for cover. His heart pounded in his chest as the ground shook beneath him. Each step of the monster was like a drumbeat, marking time until the entire district was reduced to ash. Above on the hill, Keiko and Takashi watched in silence. They saw the creature's massive form moving closer to the town's edge, its destruction inching ever closer to the high ground. Keiko felt helpless, but she also felt something else, anger. Anger at the chaos that had engulfed her home. Anger at the seeming futility of their efforts to escape. Anger at whatever force had brought this creature to their shores. We can't just sit here, she said finally, her voice low but firm. Takashi looked at her, fear in his eyes. What can we do? We're just... I don't know, Keiko interrupted. But someone has to do something. Below, in the heart of the chaos, Takashi reached the trap group. He quickly assessed the situation, directing them to move carefully over the rubble. Despite the growing tremors and the deafening roars, he kept his voice steady. This way. Stay low. Don't stop until you're clear. The creature's shadow passed over them, and Takashi held his breath. For a brief moment, it felt as if time had stopped. Then the shadow moved on, and he guided the group to a safer spot. As the fires continued to spread, and the creature pressed forward, a grim realization settled over everyone who witnessed it. This was not just a disaster. It was a warning, a harbinger of something larger. The chaos of Minato was only the beginning, to be continued. Chapter 10, The Signal. Deep beneath the surface of the earth, in an unassuming research facility hidden within the mountains, something hummed. It was faint at first, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to travel through the bedrock. But over time, it grew stronger, radiating outward until it became a pulse that reached the farthest edges of the region. It was this signal, though few knew of its existence, that had drawn the creature to Minato. Dr. Kiya Fujimoto stood in the main control room of the facility, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. The room was lined with servers and monitoring equipment, all dedicated to studying what she and her team had nicknamed the Alpha Resonance. Discovered years ago, the Alpha Resonance was an ancient energy source buried deep within the Earth's crust. Its properties were poorly understood, but emitted a distinct pattern of low-frequency sound waves that had never been observed in nature. For years, the team had been carefully studying the resonance, trying to understand its source. The readings suggested something immense, something powerful, but completely dormant. Until now, Akia turned to her lead technician, Kanamori, who was seated in front of a bank of screens displaying waveforms and seismic data. "What's the current amplitude?" "Off the charts," Kenna replied, his voice tight. "Whatever's causing this is pushing the resonance to levels we've never seen. It's like something flipped a switch." "It didn't happen by itself," Akia said. She pulled up a map on a nearby console. It showed a series of concentric circles radiating from the facility's coordinates. "This pulse, whatever it is, started hours before the creature appeared in Minato. It's a direct correlation." Kenna frowned. "You're saying the resonance is calling it?" Akia hesitated. The word felt wrong, yet it was hard to deny. "I'm saying the creature's movements match the resonance pattern exactly. It's not a coincidence." "How is that even possible?" Kenna asked, turning in his chair to face her. "The alpha resonance is just a frequency, a sound. How could it influence something like that?" Akia didn't have an answer. She was a scientist, grounded in data and logic. But the events unfolding defied explanation. The alpha resonance had been stable for years, fluctuating only slightly as they monitored it. Now, it was as if it had awakened, and so had the creature. "We need to figure out what changed," Akia said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Something triggered this. If we can isolate the cause, maybe we can stop it." "Stop it?" Kenta raised an eyebrow. "You think we can turn it off?" "I think we have to try," she replied. "If we don't, that creature isn't going to stop until it reaches the source. And if it gets here," she trailed off, not needing to say what they both knew. The facility might be secure, but it wouldn't survive a direct attack from something so massive. Akia leaned over the console and began typing commands into the system. "Let's start by narrowing down the time frame. Pull up all the data from the past 72 hours. Look for any anomalies, no matter how small." Kenta nodded and turned back to his screens. The room filled with the soft hum of fans and the clicking of keyboards as they worked. Despite the chaos unfolding above ground, the team focused with laser precision. If the alpha resonance truly was the key to the creature's movements, they had to understand why, and quickly. But deep down, Akia couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The resonance wasn't just a random frequency. It was a sound that had existed long, before humans had the technology to detect it. She had always believed it was something natural, an ancient geological phenomenon. Now, she wasn't so sure. Perhaps it wasn't just drawing the creature. Perhaps it had been meant for the creature all along. As the team delved deeper into the data, the sound of the resonance continued to grow, a low, insistent hum that filled the facility like the rhythm of a distant drum. It seemed to echo through the walls, through the very bones of the mountain, as if calling out to something that had been waiting in the depths for far too long. Outside the facility, on the mountain's forested slopes, the ground began to tremble. To be continued. Chapter 11. The Hidden Depths. The ground shook harder with every passing moment. Above the facility, the mountainside groaned under strain of seismic waves that reverberated from somewhere deep below. Trees swayed as if caught in a violent storm, their roots gripping the earth with desperation. Birds scattered, their frantic cries disappearing into thickening air. Inside the facility, Akia Fujimoto's voice cut through the tense silence. "I need updates on every sensor. How far down is the resonance originating now?" Kenta Mori glanced at the latest readings. His brow furrowed. "It's not consistent anymore. The signal's jumping around. It's like something down there is shifting." Akia moved quickly to another console, scanning through the historical data. The alpha resonance had always been a steady, predictable phenomenon. They had mapped its patterns over years of careful observation. But now, those patterns were breaking apart. The frequencies were overlapping, rising and falling like an erratic heartbeat. Could it be a cave-in? Kenta suggested. If the source is buried deep, maybe it's collapsing under its own pressure. No, Akiya said, shaking her head. The resonance itself hasn't stopped. It's just, she hesitated, struggling to find the right word. It's just alive. It's behaving like something alive. Kenta stared at her. You're saying the resonance is conscious? No, I'm saying it's reactive. Akiya gestured at the waveform on the screen. Look at this. Every time there's a seismic shift, the frequency spikes. It's like it's responding to what's happening on the surface. As if... She didn't finish. The implication was too staggering. As the team worked, the mountain continued to tremble. Large cracks appeared in the walls of the facility's outer chambers, sending dust and fragments of rock cascading down. Alarms blared, and engineers rushed to reinforce structural supports. The once pristine research center was now a hive of frantic activity, a race against time as the mountain's wrath grew more pronounced. In a darkened conference room on the facility's lowest level, a man named Kenji Nakamura watched a live feed of the chaos above. Kenji wasn't a scientist. He was a government liaison assigned to oversee the project, sent by the Ministry of Defense to ensure that whatever the alpha resonance was, it remained under control. But now, as the situation spiraled out of control, Kenji felt a cold sweat running down his back. The reports from Minato had been bad enough. An enormous creature destroying the town, moving inland with terrifying purpose. But what truly unsettled him was the growing realization that the alpha resonance and the creature's appearance were linked. This wasn't a natural disaster. It was a convergence, a collision of events that had been set in motion long before any of them had been born. Kenji turned to a subordinate, a younger official named Hayato. Contact the JSDF. We need reinforcements here. Hayato hesitated. Sir, the main forces are still en route to Minato. If we call them back here... We can't wait, Kenji snapped. If that thing reaches this facility, it won't just be Minato that's wiped off the map. We need every available resource. Now. Hayato nodded and hurried out, leaving Kenji alone with his thoughts. He glanced at the monitors again. The mountain was still trembling. The resonance was still humming. And somewhere, not far away, the creature was still advancing. In the main control room, Akiya and Kenta continued to piece together the mystery. The data was overwhelming, but a pattern was beginning to emerge. It's like the resonance is calling it, Kenta said. But why now? Why after all these years? Akiya's fingers danced over the keyboard. We always assumed the resonance was stable, that it was just a background phenomenon. But what if it wasn't dormant? What if it was dormant because something was keeping it that way? And now that something's gone? Kenta asked. Akiya nodded. Or weakened. Whatever's down there might have been asleep. Our activities, our studies, our equipment could have disturbed it. Or maybe it was always waiting for the right conditions to wake up. So you're saying we triggered it. I'm saying we don't understand it. And now we're paying the price. Kenta sat back, staring at the screen. The resonance's frequency was climbing again. The peaks and valleys of the waveform looked more erratic than ever. It was as if the signal was struggling to break free of something, like a scream trapped beneath the earth. What do we do? Kenta asked. Akiya closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. We keep going. We figure out what's causing this. And we stop it before it's too late. The ground shook again, harder this time. Equipment rattled on its shelves. The lights flickered. And far away, in the depths of the mountain, something shifted. Something ancient. Something waiting. To be continued. Chapter 12. The Awakening. The rumble grew to a roar, shaking the mountain down to its foundation. In the heart of the research facility, the flickering lights cast shadows that jumped wildly across the walls. Monitors blared warnings in red and yellow. Structural instability, power fluctuations, and pressure anomalies. Workers scrambled to stabilize their equipment, but the pulses emanating from below grew more intense, more chaotic. Akiya Fujimoto clutched the edge of her desk as another tremor nearly knocked her off her feet. The readings on the monitor were unlike anything she'd ever seen. The alpha resonance wasn't just fluctuating, it was building. The frequencies overlapped in strange, irregular patterns, forming peaks and troughs that no algorithm could predict. She turned to Kenta, who was hunched over his terminal, furiously typing. Is it still centered on the same coordinates? Akiya shouted over the alarms. Kenta nodded, his face pale. Yes, but the source is getting stronger. It's like the entire chamber is expanding. The resonance, if that's even what this still is, has grown beyond what we can measure. It's almost self-sustaining. Self-sustaining? What do you mean? Akiya demanded. It's feeding on itself. Kenta yelled. Each pulse fuels the next. The more it oscillates, the stronger it gets. We're not observing a geological event anymore. This is something else entirely. Akiya felt her stomach tighten. She knew Kenta was right. The data wasn't behaving like any natural phenomenon she had studied. She had always assumed the alpha resonance was a static frequency, a geological oddity trapped deep in the earth. Now it was alive in a way she couldn't explain, and it was growing. In the facility's command center, Kenji Nakamura stood with arms crossed, his jaw set. He had just received the latest report from the surface. The creature had reached the base of the mountain. It wasn't rampaging aimlessly. It was heading straight for them. He turned to his aide, Hayato, who had been frantically relaying orders. Have they set up the perimeter? Kenji asked. Yes, sir, Hayato replied. But it's not going to hold. The local JSDF units have small arms, nothing that can stop something that big. Then they'll slow it down, Kenji said coldly. Buy us time. Time for what? Hayato asked. Kenji didn't answer. He knew they were running out of options. The creature wasn't just drawn by the resonance. It was being driven. Something deep below, something tied to the very energy they had spent years studying, had roused it. And if the resonance continued to grow, the creature wouldn't stop until it reached the source. If that happened, Kenji didn't want to think about the consequences. In the mountain's lower chambers, the tremors intensified. Deep beneath the facility, where only the automated sensors and remote cameras ventured, the ancient rock walls began to fracture. Pieces of stone tumbled into the abyss, swallowed by a growing chasm. A glow emanated from the depths, a faint, pulsing light that matched the rhythm of the resonance. Akiya watched the live feed on her screen. The light wasn't natural. It flickered and shifted, almost as if it were alive. She leaned closer, her heart pounding. Kenta, she said, pointing to the monitor, what is that? Kenta glanced at the feed, his fingers hesitating over the keyboard. That wasn't there before. What do you mean? The cameras have been running for months, and we've never seen anything like that, Kenta explained. This glow, it's new. Whatever's happening down there, it's changing. Akiya studied the screen, feeling a growing sense of dread. She wasn't sure what she was looking at. Energy, some kind of biological process, or something beyond her understanding. But one thing was certain. The alpha resonance wasn't a geological phenomenon anymore. It was something else. Something alive. Another quake rocked the facility, sending a stack of papers fluttering to the floor. Alarms blared louder, and the mainframe let out a sharp, metallic whine as the server strained against the incoming data. Akiya stood, her mind racing. We have to get out of here. If that thing below breaks free. It's too late, Ken interrupted, his voice grim. He pointed to the seismic chart on the main screen. Look. The pulses had reached a peak frequency. The chart was no longer a series of jagged lines. It was a solid block of energy, an impenetrable wall of sound. The resonance had become a force unto itself. And then it stopped. For a moment, the room fell eerily silent. The alarms, the tremors, the flickering lights. Everything ceased. The quiet was deafening, a pause so unnatural that everyone froze in place. Kenta looked at Akiya, his face pale. What just happened? I don't know, Akiya said, her voice barely a whisper. But I don't think it's over. The silence broke with a sound unlike any they'd heard before, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to come from the very core of the mountain. It was not a roar, not a quake, not the hum of machinery. It was a voice, and it was waking up To be continued. Chapter 13, The Unveiling. The voice was unlike anything they had ever experienced. More than a sound, it was a presence that filled every corner of the facility. It resonated in their bones, their very thoughts, a deep vibration that blurred the line between the physical and the mental. The researchers clutched their ears, but there was no escaping it. The voice wasn't just heard, it was felt. Akia stumbled backward, bracing herself against the console. "Kenta!" she shouted, though her voice felt small and hollow in the face of the overwhelming sound. "What's happening?" Kenta was pale, his hands trembling as he tried to mute the audio feeds. To shut out the noise. "It's coming from the source. I don't know what's causing it. It's not the resonance anymore. It's something else, something alive." The monitors displayed chaos. In the depths of the mountain, the glowing fissure widened, spewing light and waves of heat that warped the air around it. The ground quaked in rhythmic intervals, each tremor stronger than the last. It was as if the earth itself was speaking. Then the voice shifted. The deep resonance broke into a series of rising tones, almost melodic, as though it were forming a pattern. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Akia stared at the screens, her scientific instincts kicking in despite the terror. "It's a signal," she murmured. "Not just a sound. It's communication." Communication with what? Kenna asked, his voice breaking. Before she could answer, the building shook violently. Metal girders groaned, ceiling tiles fell and the lights flickered. Everyone in the room fell to the floor, clutching at desks and rails for support. Akia glanced at the main feed, and her heart froze. The fissure below was no longer a simple crack in the rock. It had opened wide, revealing a vast, glowing chamber that stretched far beyond the reach of their cameras. Within it, dark, shifting shapes began to move. Massive forms, indistinct but undeniably alive, stirred in the shadows. The light from the chamber illuminated their hulking outlines, figures that seemed impossibly large, even in the already enormous cavern. One shape stepped forward, its bulk blotting out the camera's view. For a moment, Akia caught a glimpse of a feature that sent a chill through her entire body. An eye, enormous and glowing, staring straight at the camera. The feed cut out. Akia pulled herself to her feet. "That's it," she said, her voice trembling. "We have to evacuate. Now!" Kenta didn't argue. He grabbed the backup drives, shoved them into a case, and followed her toward the exit. Around them, the other researchers scrambled to gather what they could, some barely taking anything at all. The walls shook with increasing intensity, and the strange voice continued to pulse through the facility, unrelenting. In the command center above, Kenji Nakamura stood frozen in front of the central screen. He had just witnessed the same image, that glowing eye staring back at them. His aide Hayato tugged at his sleeve. "Sir, we need to go." Kenji didn't move. "That's not the same creature," he said quietly. "It's another one. Sir." Kenji shook his head, breaking free of his paralysis. "Get everyone out. Now. Order a full evacuation of the facility. We can't stay here any longer." Hayato nodded and rushed to relay the orders, leaving Kenji to stare at the now static screen. Whatever was below the mountain, whatever had been awakened by their experiments, was not alone. The creature outside was just the beginning. As the team fled to the shaking corridors, the voice grew louder, reverberating through the mountain as though it were alive. It wasn't just a warning or a cry. It was a declaration. Something old and powerful had been disturbed, and it was rising. Akia reached the surface with Kenta close behind. The sky was eerily clear, stars scattered across a deep, dark canvas. The air was heavy, thick with tension. As she turned to look down the mountain, she saw it, the creature that had devastated Minato. It was climbing the rocky slope, its glowing eyes fixed on the facility. "It's here," she whispered. Kenta grabbed her arm. "We have to keep moving." But Akia couldn't look away. The beast's movements were methodical, each step sending tremors through the ground. As it drew closer, it let out a deafening roar, a sound that echoed to the mountains and was answered by another, deeper rumble from below. The voice was rising again, more complex than before, as if reacting to the creature's presence. Akia realized with a jolt that the two were connected. The resonance, the creature, the fissure below. It was all part of the same event, a chain reaction set in motion by forces they had never intended to unleash. "We did this," she said, her voice barely audible. Kenda pulled her away, and the team fled into the night. Behind them, the mountain continued to shake, and the glowing fissure widened further. The ground cracked, and steam erupted from new openings in the earth. Whatever lay below was breaking free, and the creature on the surface was coming to meet it. To be continued. Chapter 14, The Clashing Titans. The evacuation was in full swing, but no one had a clear destination. Akia and her team had joined the mass exodus of personnel from the facility, all of them making a desperate run down the winding mountain roads. Vehicles packed with engineers, scientists, and support staff sped toward the lowlands, headlights cutting through the dust-filled air. Every so often, a tremor would shake the ground, and the lead cars would come to a sudden halt, sending panicked drivers spilling out of their vehicles to shout at one another. Akia stayed near the front of her group, her mind racing almost as fast as her feet. She couldn't stop thinking about the fissure, about the immense figure she'd seen on the monitor. That eye, so vast, so alien, seemed burned into her memory. Whatever was stirring below the earth wasn't natural. It wasn't something they could reason with or contain. It was something ancient, something that predated humanity's understanding of the world. "We need to get to a higher vantage point," she told Kenna, who was jogging alongside her. "I need to see what's happening. If we don't understand the situation, we'll have no way to predict the next step." Kenna panted but nodded. "Up there," he said, pointing to a ridge a few hundred meters to their left. The incline was steep, but it offered a clear view of the valley below and the mountain summit above, together. They veered off the main road and scrambled up the rocky slope, their boots slipping on loose gravel. A few other researchers followed, eager for a better sense of the chaos they were fleeing. When they reached the ridge, Akia turned around and gasped. From this height, she could see both the creature approaching the facility and the strange light from the fissure below. The mountain seemed alive, shaking with every footstep of the colossal beast. It was nearly the entrance to the research center now, its glowing spines casting eerie shadows against the smoke-filled sky. And then it stopped. "What's it doing?" Kenna asked, squinting. The creature raised its head, tilting it slightly as though it were listening. A deep resin hum rolled up from the earth, louder than before, almost musical in its rhythm. The fissure's light intensified, illuminating the dark landscape with an otherworldly glow. Then the hum shifted, turning into something more complex, something that sounded almost like language. Akia's breath caught. She had studied marine communication for years, cataloging the songs of whales, the clicks of dolphins, even the low-frequency grunts of fish. But this wasn't like anything she had heard before. It was vast and layered, with overlapping tones that created a sense of depth. It wasn't just a sound. It was a message. "It's calling it," she whispered. "Whatever's down there is calling the creature." And the creature responded. With a thunderous roar, it lowered its massive frame toward the fissure, its glowing eyes locked on the source of the sound. The ground quaked, and Akia steadied herself against a nearby rock. Then the fissure widened further, spilling more light and heat. The air around it shimmered, distorting like a mirage. The outline of another figure began to take shape in the glow, something even larger than the first. "No," Kenna said, his voice trembling. "No, no, no." From the depths of the fissure, another creature emerged. Its body was covered in a thick, almost crystalline armor that glinted in the eerie light. Spikes jutted from its back, and its eyes shone with a brilliant blue hue. The two beasts faced each other across the mountain slope, their sheer size making the earth itself seem small. For a moment, there was silence. Then, with a sound like grinding stone, the newcomer let out a low, guttural growl. The first creature, the one that had ravaged Monado, raised itself to its full height and bellowed in response. The sound was deafening, reverberating through the valley and sending loose rocks tumbling down the slopes. "They're going to fight," Akia said, the realization hitting her like a blow. Kenta stared in disbelief. "What can we do? We can't stop them." "We can't," Akia admitted. "But we need to understand what's happening. This isn't random. These two are." She stopped herself. What was the word she was looking for? Opponents? Rivals? Or something more primal? The ground trembled violently as the first beast took a step forward, its massive claws digging into the earth. The second creature, larger and more heavily armored, braced itself, spreading its spiked forelimbs wide. The fissure between them glowed brighter, as if feeding energy into both combatants. Then they charged. The two collided with a force that shook the entire mountain. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, flattening trees and knocking Akia and Kenna to the ground. Rocks tumbled down the slopes, and a cloud of dust and debris rose into the sky, obscuring the view of the battle. But even through the haze, they could hear the sound of massive claws raking against thick armor, of roars that seemed to split the heavens. Akia shielded her face from a flying debris. "Get down!" she shouted. The ridge beneath them trembled, and a deep crack formed along its edge. Kenta grabbed her arm. "We have to move before we're buried." She hesitated, her eyes fixed on the swirling chaos below. This was no longer a simple escape. She needed answers to questions no one had dared ask before. What were these creatures? Why had they been hidden for so long? And what had humanity unleashed by disturbing them? But Kenta's grip tightened. "Akia will die here." Reluctantly, she turned away from the battle and began scrambling down the ridge, the sounds of clashing titans echoing in her ears. Each step sent her further from the creature's fury, but she knew she couldn't run forever. No one could. The earth had woken something it couldn't contain, and now the world would have to face it. To be continued. Chapter 15. Echoes of the Past. Akia and Kenta stumbled down the crumbling ridge, the tremors of the beast's battle still shaking the ground. The roars and crashes faded slightly as they descended, but the mountain seemed alive with the energy of the conflict above. Dust and smoke blurred the horizon, and the glow from the fissure cast an eerie light over everything. When they reached a flatter stretch of ground, Akia paused to catch her breath. Her chest heaved, and her mind raced with questions. She knew the two creatures weren't simply animals. They were something older, something far beyond humanity's understanding. The alpha resonance wasn't a geological anomaly or a quirk of nature. It was a remnant of something ancient, something that had been dormant for longer than she could fathom. "What are they?" Kenta said, wiping sweat and dirt from his face. "What did we wake up?" Akia shook her head. "I don't know, but I think the resonance isn't just a sound. It's a key, something we never understood fully, and we turned it on." "You're saying we did this?" Kenna muttered. "We brought those things back." "I don't think we brought them back," Akia said. "I think they were always here, waiting." Kenta looked at her, his eyes wide. "Waiting for what?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but we need to figure it out. Fast." They began moving again, heading for the lower valley where the evacuation convoy had regrouped. Military trucks and emergency vehicles formed a makeshift command center, their lights cutting through the smoky haze. Akia saw rows of people, scientists, engineers, and locals, huddled together under tarps and tents. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter, their faces grim. Akia and Kenta were ushered toward a central command tent, where Kenji Nakamura stood, speaking to a group of officers. His expression was stern, and his words were clipped. When he saw Akia and Ken approach, he turned and motioned them inside. "What's the status?" Kenji asked as soon as they were close. Akia didn't bother with pleasantries. The resonance triggered a second creature. "It's fighting the first one now, right above the fissure." Kenji's jaw tightened. "So there are two of them." "Two that we know of," Akia corrected. "And they're not random animals. They're connected to the resonance. I think the fissure was some kind of containment. When we started studying the resonance, we didn't realize it wasn't just a natural phenomenon. We accidentally opened containment." Kenji frowned. "And now they're loose." Akia nodded. "I believe the resonance was keeping them dormant, locked away. When we altered its frequency, whether through our equipment or the drilling, we destabilized it." Kent interjected. "If they were dormant, what woke them now? Why not before?" "I don't know yet," Akia admitted, "but it's clear that something changed. Maybe our activities disturbed a delicate balance. Maybe something else triggered the sequence. But whatever the cause, It's too late to stop it now. They're awake, and they're reacting to each other. Kenji crossed his arms, his gaze fixed on the distant glow of the mountain. What do you suggest we do? Akiya hesitated. First, we need more data. If we can determine exactly what's causing the resonance to spike, we might be able to stabilize it again. Maybe even put them back to sleep. Kenji raised an eyebrow. Put them back to sleep? How? I don't know yet, she admitted. But if we can find the original pattern of the resonance, the one that kept them contained, we might be able to reverse it. That sounds like a long shot, Kenji said. It is, Akiya replied. But it's the only shot we have. Trying to fight them directly will be suicide. You've seen the reports. Conventional weapons won't stop something like that. If we want any hope of saving the region, and possibly the entire country, we need to focus on the source. Kenji considered her words for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. All right, gather whatever equipment you need. We'll give you the support we can. But make it quick. Those things won't wait. Akiya turned to Kenta. We need the data logs from the main facility. The backup drives we brought might still have the original resonance patterns. Kenta nodded. I'll get started. As the team set to work, the sounds of battle raged on in the distance. The ground shook intermittently, and the glow from the mountain illuminated the sky. The clash of the two titans continued unabated, their roars and impacts echoing through the valley. But Akiya's focus was now on the past, on the echoes of a time before humans existed, when the earth held secrets that no one was meant to uncover. To be continued. Chapter 16, A Plan in Motion. Inside the command tent, the air was thick with tension. The rumble of the ongoing battle on the mountain filtered to the canvas walls, and every so often a roar or distant explosion would make the ground vibrate beneath their feet. Akiya sat at a makeshift table, spreading out data printouts and diagrams alongside a stack of backup drives. Her laptop was hooked into a portable generator, its screen glowing dimly in the harsh fluorescent light. Kenta sat beside her, his face tight with concentration, as he scrolled through columns of raw seismic data. We need to isolate the original resonance pattern, Akiya said, tapping a finger on a jagged graph on the printout. If we can find the baseline frequency, what it looked like before it started escalating, then we might have a chance of recreating it. Kenta frowned, adjusting his glasses. But the signals change so much. It's like it's rewriting itself. This thing is alive, or at least reactive. How do we know it'll respond the same way if we try to reset it? Akiya paused, her gaze locked on the screen. We don't, she admitted. But the pattern didn't become erratic on its own. It was triggered. If we can identify that point and roll it back, find a moment before it destabilized, we might be able to reverse the process. Kenta opened another file, showing a timeline of seismic events. This one, he said, pointing, the first spike we couldn't explain. It happened 2 weeks after the deep coring tests. We thought it was just noise and equipment error. But if you look here, he overlaid another graph, showing a subtle shift in the resonance frequency. See? That's when it started diverging from the baseline. Akiya leaned closer, her brow furrowed. If that's where it began, then we have to reintroduce the original frequency at this point. But we'll need equipment that can handle that kind of output. The standard generators won't be enough. Kenta sat back, chewing his lip. We'll need to set up a temporary array, something that can broadcast the signal at the scale we're talking about. The main transmitters are at the facility, and he trailed off, glancing toward the glowing mountain. Well, I don't think we're getting those back. Akiya thought for a moment. What about the portable array we used in the first test phase? The old high-frequency amplifiers. They're in the secondary storage, Kenta said. I'll get them, but we'll need a secure site to set them up. Somewhere away from the battle, but close enough to reach the resonance source. Before Akiya could reply, Kenji entered the tent, his expression grim. We have a situation, he said. Kenta looked up from his laptop. More creatures? No, Kenji said. But the first two are still fighting, and their movements are heading closer to the valley. The evacuation routes are at risk. If they push too far, we'll lose our fallback position. We're trying to reroute the convoy. But if we can't contain them... He didn't finish the sentence. The implications were clear. There would be no safe place for anyone if the Titans descended into the valley. Akia closed her laptop. We don't have much time. If we can set up the array and reintroduce the original resonance, it might stop them from coming any closer. But we need help. Kenji nodded. You'll have it. I'll assign a team to get the equipment and set up the array. You just tell us where. Akia hesitated, then pointed at a topographical map spread across the table. Here, she said, indicating a flat ridge halfway up the mountain. It's high enough to get a clear signal, and far enough in the battle that we won't be caught in the crossfire. Kenji studied the map, and then glanced at the distant mountain through the tent's open flap. The glow of the fissure was visible even from here, a pulsating beacon that drew all eyes to it. He nodded curtly. We'll make it happen. As he left, Kenna gathered the printouts and started packing the equipment. Do you really think this will work? He asked, his voice low. I don't know, Akia admitted, but it's the only chance we have. If we don't try, there's no stopping them. They'll keep fighting until the entire region is leveled. Kenta didn't respond. He simply handed her a stack of data sheets and zipped up the case containing the backup drives. Together, they prepared to leave the tent and join the team heading up the ridge. The mountain continued to rumble, the sound of the Titans' clash echoing in their ears. But this time, Akia felt a flicker of hope, fragile, but enough to keep her moving forward. To be continued.